morning, everyone. My name is Carla, and you've reached my FlossTube channel, Carla being Crafty, where I talk about mostly cross stitch, but also other crafts that I enjoy. But today is a FlossTube extra. I went back, I was revisiting things that I'd done on my channel, and I did a video almost 4 years ago now. It was the first year that I started stitching, which was 2019, and not that long, about 6 months after I started my channel, which was at the end of June 2019. And I did a video on full coverage, specifically Heaven and Earth designs, and the two projects that I was working on, stitching them on the diagonal using parking, etc., etc. And I did a demo. I explained how I set everything up, how I did it. Yeah, so that was 4 years ago. So fast forward to here, 2023, and I have a little bit more experience under my belt, a little bit more experience with full coverage, and I thought it'd be kind of fun and interesting to go back and kind of revisit that video, and kind of discuss how things have changed, what things have stayed the same, how my stitching full coverage is now, is it any different, that kind of thing. So at that time I had two projects going, and there were certain things I said that I would never do this, or I always do this, which are completely different now. And then there's some things that are the same. So yeah, so that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about full coverage, and how my stitching on them has changed and how it stayed the same, etc. I'm specifically today talking about full coverage a la Heaven and Earth designs. At that time, all I had experience with was Heaven and Earth designs. But since then, I have looked at and purchased projects from other companies. The ones that I'm familiar with is Artecy and Unconventional Cross Stitch and Golden Kite. I haven't purchased anything from Golden Kite because I think they're a little bit expensive for me. But all three of them have very beautiful patterns, and definitely if you're in the market for full coverage, Heaven Earth Designs is fantastic, but there are other options out there as well. Now, what I'm not talking about today, although technically I guess you could call them full coverage, are things like Dimensions Gold kits. Those are full coverage, but I don't stitch them the same way as I do my, full coverage projects. I also have a DesignWorks kit that basically is full coverage, except for like the bit at the top. I'm not really talking about that one either, because I don't stitch that like I stitch full coverage either. It's more of a, I would say almost like a coloring book design. It has, it's Laurel Birch cats, and they're all outlined in black, so I kind of stitch them more like coloring book style. I don't use the method that I use for my full coverage. So, so I'm just talking about what you typically think of as full coverage. So the first thing that I wanted to show you guys, because in that video back almost 4 years ago, and please go watch it. I don't think that anything I said in there, although things have changed, I don't think that there was anything really erroneous that I said. With one caveat, I was talking about the difference between regular like Heaven Earth design charts, mini Heaven Earth design charts, and quick stitch, and I think I said some stuff wrong. So I do want to clarify that. So a regular Heaven Earth design chart, or any of the full coverages, they're big, typically, 400, 700 stitches in the vertical and horizontal. And that's a lot, especially if you're somebody like me who has a lot of projects going. Although I don't have a problem with having a lot of projects, I'm kind of like in this middle space, right? I don't mind having a lot of projects going, but I also don't want to have so many projects going and so many things started but not with a lot of work on them that I'm never going to have any finishes, in my lifetime. That I don't want to do. So So I'm not really keen on doing full size, full coverage, because they are a huge time commitment, and they don't so much fit in with what I see, you know, how many years I have left. I mean, even if I have 50 years left in my life, I still, you know, feel like I have to be realistic about what I can get done. Now, of course, I have exceptions to that rule. I have a full-size Lavender design project that I started, which is on my inactive list. I haven't stitched on it in quite a while, but I'm not ready to like throw it away or anything like that. I figure eventually I'm gonna go back to it. And then I have another full-size project that I just started last year that just I just couldn't say no to it. So we'll visit that as well. But back to the difference between quick stitch and mini. And hopefully I'm saying this right. If I'm not, and you're watching this and you're like, no, she's completely wrong, then please correct me in the comments. But I think that this is correct. So quick stitches tend to be the same as a full-size project, except smaller. So often what that means is that like a really big project, you'll see this a lot with the Amy Stewart projects. Really big projects, they'll pull out a smaller piece of that project, like, you know, like the stitching shelves, like one of the vignettes will be pulled out as its own chart. So, and then there's other designers like Nadia Tate with the fairies, where all of the projects are quick stitch because they're smaller pieces. They're like, you know, 100, 150 to 250 stitches. It just is a smaller piece. So you're going to get the same experience as far as confetti and number of colors and that kind of thing. But it's just a smaller overall picture. The difference between that and a mini is, with a mini, they oftentimes take a full-size picture and shrink it down. So in doing that, they can be a little bit more pixelated because there's less detail. And the thing that I said wrong is I said that they had less confetti. They actually have more confetti because you know, you have more colors trying to take up the space of many colors, if that makes sense. That's why they're a little bit more pixelated. So minis are full-size pictures that are shrunk, and quick stitches are pieces of full-size pictures, or they're just smaller pictures to start with. So hopefully that makes sense. I tend to like the quick stitches, probably quick stitches best, although I do have a couple minis. And the minis I have, I'm not having any problem with pixelation or anything like that, but they are pretty confetti heavy. So, so just take that as you will. More confetti is going to take a little bit longer to stitch, just because you're changing threads more, changing colors. There's going to be less blocks. But yeah, so back in that first video, I did demos on the two projects that I was working on, and I finished both of those projects in the intervening time. Now, one thing that I did say that kind of cracks me up now is when I was talking about the difference between like a full size and a mini, or a full size and a quick stitch, I was saying like a quick stitch you could get done in like a year or two, whereas, you know, the full size might take you, you know, 6-7 years. Okay, that was me being completely unrealistic as far as my stitching time. My quick stitches took probably about 3 years each, I would say. I finished the first one first and the second one after, but they took a while. I started this first one in 2019 and I finished it right at the end of 2021, I believe. So yeah, so it took me a little bit over 2 years. And then I started Catnap Faye and I finished it early this year. Okay, so the first one that I did was Lavender Roses. And so this is my first HAED finish, my first full coverage finish. I had a highlighter incident, which taught me very visually to be careful with my highlighters around my fabric. But I love this. It spoke to me like this the second I saw this chart, which was shortly after I started stitching. I actually got this from 123 Stitch, not from Heaven and Earth Designs, but it did introduce me to Heaven and Earth Designs, and I do love, love, love this. I have a companion chart for this one called Tuxedo Eyes, which looks exactly like my cat Herbie, who I lost, gosh, I think 2016, 2017 is when he passed away, and he was over 21 years old when he died, and the Tuxedo Eyes looks exactly like him. And I'm thinking, like, if I start another one, another full coverage in the next year or so, that will be the one that I start. But my plans for this, I did get a frame for it, and I got matte board in a really pretty purple that matches the roses that needs to be cut. However, when I got it, I got all the components to do it, but I realized it's probably going to be more difficult than I thought it was, and I don't really have the space or the place to do it. So Julie Stitching at the Cabin offered her husband services. She did ask him, and he said he would be happy to do it. So one of these days when I go over to visit them, I'm going to bring this and the matte cutter and the matte board, and her husband said that he would take it out to his garage and cut the mat for me. So he's very handyman and artistically inclined that way, so I have a feeling that he could do a better job than I could. And I have extra mat boards, so I can bring ones, for him to practice on before he tries it on the colored one that I want. So anyway, that was the first one that I finished. And then the one that I finished this year was Catnap Fae by Nadia Tate. And I have a ton of her fairies because when I first started stitching and first started enjoying full coverage, I just love all her patterns, and they all have a kitty on them. The only thing is most of them have this orange kitty. I don't have an orange kitty. I have a black kitty, but they're all similar fairies with a cute little kitty. And I like them all. So anyway, this one's Catnap Fae, and as I said, I finished that like early this year, like January. Like I thought I was gonna finish it last year and didn't quite. Okay, so those were the two that I was working on in my last video where I talked about full coverage, and they're done. So now I have more projects. So at that time I only had two. Now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that I'm actively working on, and one that I have kind of on my inactive pile, but I still have it. Okay, so that's one of the differences is I have more projects now, and I just kind of stick them into my rotation as they fit, and then sometimes I'll pull one out because I just feel like working on it, even though it doesn't fit into the theme for that month. And yeah, I mean, I'm not in a rush to get them done. I mean, I do want to work on them a little bit, over the course of the year so that they are making progress. But, I'm not like in a rush and worried about it or anything like that. Things that have changed. Well, I guess I'm going to kind of talk about all the things about them and then, mix in, well, this has changed, this is different. So one of the things, the big things that has changed is when I first started stitching, I was adamant that I had to have gridded fabric. So this one was done on a pre-gridded fabric, and I did wash it. It didn't come out 100%. I didn't really worry with this one because, because of the full coverage, it doesn't show through or anything like that. I would say for your first full coverage that gridded fabric is great. And at the time when I first started, I was like, I will never not have gridded fabric. This one, because I was not doing the background and so it wasn't pre-gridded, I gridded it myself using fishing line, which was a pain to do. I would say now I don't I don't need it. I thought that I would always have to grid, and then I realized as time went on that I know enough what I'm doing that I don't need the grids, and they're not as necessary. I also found that the gridding, like the pre-gridded fabric, are not all the same. Like the 18 count and the 25 are good. The 20 count that I got is not. It's like the line is kind of like, I feel like it's in the wrong place, so it makes it almost harder to count. So yeah, so that is something that's changed, the idea that I need to have gridding to do this stitching. Also the size of the fabric that I use. So this one was an 18 count. I think this was an 18 count, yeah. Pre-gridded. This was actually 16 count because that's what I had. And then as time has gone on, I kind of got smaller and smaller, and you'll see like each one of these projects is different. Like this is 28, this is 28, this is 20, 22, 28, and then I think that the big one's 25. So what I prefer now is 28 count, and I do tent stitch. That's my preferred. Not everything like that I have to show you today is like that, because you know, some of them were done a while ago. But yeah, I have settled into that my favorite is 28 count tent. And I have three projects like that. Then I have one that I'm doing on 20 count, which is gridded fabric. I started it longer ago. And that, of course, I'm doing full cross. I have one that I started this year on 22 count Hardanger. I was going to do it on with tent stitch, but usually I'm not a coverage queen. Like I don't worry about coverage, but for whatever reason on this one, I just thought that the full cross looked better than the tent on the Hardanger, and so I went ahead and I'm doing it 2/1 full cross on 22 count. It's a little, like, I have to say, if I look really close, the stitches are a little messy, but it's okay, because full coverage, you know, it just all blends in. So that's one thing that, you know, I really should mark these things off so I know what I'm telling you. Yeah, so, but my full preference right now is tent stitch on 28 count. Let's see. Okay. Kitting up my charts, or kitting up the projects, I pretty much am doing the same. My very first one, I kitted up using bags and rings, and I hated the method. That one would never be done again. My second one, I kitted up using floss cards, and I put the strands, the threads, on both sides of the floss card. And I realized, so I did it like this. Actually, this is the leftovers from that. So I did it like this, and I had my flosses on both sides. And I realized fairly quickly that I didn't really love that method either, because the flosses just didn't stay nice. So what I do now, and this is what I started doing from like the third full coverage on, and I do this actually for any larger projects, so like all of my fancy ladies and stuff like that. I do this way as well. I use floss cards, but I only use one side, and I hook them like this. So all of my flosses, they don't get tangled. It is, you know, if you want to say it's a waste, okay, fine. Because I'm only using half of the holes, so I have 10 holes per floss card instead of 20. But they're easy to get at, they're easy to see, and they stay nice. And then when I put them in the bag, I'm able to kind of just wrap them around and put them in, and they don't tangle or anything. I also, when I kit up, I put a tag on each color. Sometimes I do it by making a copy of the chart on sticker paper if I have it. And sometimes I do it by handwriting the symbols, but I always put the symbol and the color number. The reason that I do both the symbol and the color number is the symbol is for ease of finding the color when I'm stitching. I don't have to look at another page, right? I don't have to look at a chart to figure out what color the symbol is. But I still want the color number there, because if I run out on here, then I can replace it easily. So that is the method that I've developed. So the kitting up is pretty much has developed, and I'm doing it. I guess it's not exactly the same as it was with the first one, because I've developed it since then. But that's how I do all of my kitting up. I still do a loop start to start my threads. However, when I did that video, I was saying that I usually used a pin start to end my threads, and I don't do that as much anymore. I kind of do it from the back, just running it through. And the reason is because the how I stitch, the physical how I stitch, is a little bit different. When I first started stitching and started doing full coverage, I used to do my full coverages like either sitting on my desk with a lap stand kind of thing, and it's in that video. Or I've tried a couple different stands. I don't use stands so much anymore. I don't need to. And as time has gone by, I am having a little bit more back problems and stuff. And sitting here is uncomfortable for me. So I can't stitch comfortably for a long time sitting here. So I do it instead of using the stand or the table stand. I still will sometimes use that table stand thing. I have it actually on my Dragon Project here, which I'll show you, but I still do it. I do it my regular way of stitching, which is basically lying on my daybed or my bed, because that's all I have. And I'll prop things. If I'm using the stand, I prop it on my chest on a pillow, or I'm just stitching in a regular hoop or frame. So I don't need the stand so much anymore. I still have a couple of I never got a really good stand, and because I just couldn't afford it. And if I ever am living someplace where I have the kind of like proper setup, like a stitchy chair that I could put a stand next to, then I might change that method, because the one thing that I did like about having a stand is being able to kind of stitch two-handed, which I can't do so much when I'm holding a frame. But for now, that's the best way for me to stitch. It's the most comfortable. I can stitch for longer periods of time because my back doesn't start to hurt. And so I'm not really using the stands anymore. I'm using just a regular frame or hoop. Because of that, I also now have learned that I need grime guards. I didn't think that I did at first, but I did realize when I finished Lavender Roses, it needed to be washed because that edge fabric was dirty, and I didn't really realize it until I took it off the frame. So now I'm much more cognizant of that, and I do use grime guards on all of my full coverage projects. I don't really use them. I don't use grime guards on my regular projects because I don't keep the regular projects in a frame. I use different hoops. I change them out. I use hoops mostly, and I change them out every time. But because with my full coverages, I pretty much leave them in the frame or the hoop for long periods of time, I'm realizing they can get dirty just from the holding it. And so now I'm using grime guards. Okay, let's see. Frame stand I'm not really using anymore. Gridding is not necessary. And again, that's why I don't use pin stitch to end my threads as much, because it's easier to turn them. They're not locked into a frame, which was one of the reasons I did pin stitch so much, is because it was really hard to get to the back. Now it's not. So, okay. Kidding Up is the same. Loop start. Okay. When I first started stitching, I discovered, you know, through trial and error, my favorite needles were the Pat Carson, Pat's Favorite Needle. I still love those. They don't make them really anymore. I think somebody started making some of them, but they always were really expensive. And, you know, I have discovered that if you go onto Amazon, and you put like gold ended needles or whatever, you can get a pack of like 100 needles for like $8 or something like that. And they come in a little tube. They may not be the best needles ever, but you know what? For me, I don't have any problem with them. And when I'm doing full coverage and I'm using a bunch of needles at a time, they're not getting as much of a workout as they might with, you know, one project. So I just have big packs of needles. Because I'm using smaller fabric, I'm tending to use more 28s now. And I still use 26s on some, but I use 26 and 28. If I pull out a needle and it's got, you know, the head of it is more smushed and it's harder to thread the thread in it, I'll just grab a different one. I don't futz with it. That's one of the things I really liked about the Pat Carson needles, is that the eyes seemed to be bigger and they were easier to thread. But these cheap Amazon ones that I've gotten, I haven't had any problem with them. So that is one way that, you know, I don't worry about buying really expensive needles. I've gotten those packs of 26 or 28 in the Amazon. Let me see if I can grab this easily, which I don't think I can. No, I can't. But anyway, the cheap needles have worked very well, especially for the parking, because I'm using a lot of needles at a time, and so they're not having to do, you know, rough duty, I guess. Let's see what else is different. Okay, so the things that are the same as you would see in that video from 4 years ago is I still do my full coverages in diagonals of 10. I still stick to that 10. I don't go out of my row of 10. And I pretty much stick to each little row of 10. Now I do have one exception, and I'll show you that, with Kitty Magic, because right now, okay, well, let me just show you. So Kitty Magic, I think was the third full coverage that I started. And it is a monochromatic. Not fully, because it has green eyes. I'm talking about the kitty and you're gonna talk too? I guess you are. That's Baggy. Oh, he's over here. What are you doing? Okay. Anyway, Kitty Magic. This is by Katerina Koukiotis. Probably not saying that right. But anyway, this is a monochromatic, so I was very sort of intrigued with the idea of a monochromatic piece. But it does have the green eyes. So there's a lot of greens in there that, you know, I'm barely going to use. But it's a lot of grays and whites and creams and dark black grays. But because it is a monochromatic-ish piece, it only has 51 colors. Most of the Heaven of charts or other charts I had have like between 90 and 120. So it's a lot fewer colors. And a good chunk of those colors, the greens, are only going to be used in a very small area. So what does this mean, and why does that make an exception to how I'm stitching it right now? Because I'm still kind of in the background. There's only been 4 or 5 colors that have come up. This is kind of hard to see, I realize, because it is still kind of the white gray So you can see that this is one that I still, when I was like, I have to grid, or I have to have gridded fabric. And so the difference in the way I stitch is that I don't, at least at this point, don't stick to the 10 stitches across. So because I've only been using with three or four colors for the entire diagonal, and actually when you're in a section like this, it's maybe 2 colors, right? I will stitch, still sticking to the 10 stitches across, but I will stitch a color all the way through the diagonal until I run out of the floss, and then go back and do the other color. So that has kind of been the slight modification that I made when I stitch on this one. Instead of doing 10 stitches and then 10 stitches and then 10 stitches, I'll take the one color that I'm working with and do whatever's in that row of 10, then the next row of 10, then the next row of 10, then the next row of 10, all the way down the diagonal. And this, this is a 20 count easy guide. This one I am doing full cross. So that is like my exception to the rule of stitching on the diagonal. I still do parking, which I know is something that some people can't wrap their head around, and I get it. I don't think I could do full coverage without parking. I definitely couldn't do full coverage in the diagonal without parking, because I hate stopping and starting threads. I mean, starting a new thread and ending a thread, that's my least favorite part. So if I had to like stop and if I had to add and end threads like every 10 stitches, I would hate it. So the parking works really well for me. I know there's like different methods, different ways that people do it, and all I can suggest is if you're interested in parking, just try a couple different things, watch different videos until something clicks in your head, because that's what I did. And basically I watched a couple different videos, and all of a sudden it went, hey, I get that. That makes sense to me on how that would work. And yeah, and now it just works for me. I know there's people who love doing cross country or modified cross country. I would never be able to do that because it would just be riddled with mistakes. I can't count. I can't. And it would just be riddled with mistakes. I'd always have to pull stuff out, and I wouldn't do it. I would hate it. Even when I'm stitching regular stuff, you'll notice if you watch my regular videos that I start wherever I start, and then my project grows from there, right? Whether it grows up one direction or grows out like an amoeba, I'm always stitching, touching. And I think that might be part of the reason that I don't necessarily enjoy like samplers or Quakers or stuff like that where it's different motifs, because I don't like the counting part. And you know, I'm not going to count all the way down and start over here when I'm working over here. That's not how I do it. Okay, so yeah, I still do the diagonals and I still park. The one thing that the difference, there's a difference because I have projects that are starting, I think I've started projects in all 4 corners now. Maybe not top right, but I've definitely started top left, I've started bottom left, and I have one starting bottom right now. And the big difference is depending on how your diagonal is going. If it's going from the bottom up or from the top down is where you park. So if you're going from the top down, I park in the bottom of the leg. I still stitch my same, leg. So when I'm doing 10th stitch, it's the same as the bottom leg of my full cross, which is top right to bottom left or bottom left to top right, whichever way. So if I'm going down, I park in the bottom. And if I'm going up, I park in the top. And I start closest to the stitches that are already done. In other words, if I'm going from the bottom left up, so the diagonal's going like this, then I start in the top right of that stitch all the way to the left and stitch like reading. For my project that is started in the bottom right, I still am parking in the top right, but then I stitch like this, like reading in Hebrew. So hopefully that makes sense. The other thing that hasn't changed for me is I don't use Pattern Keeper. When I started stitching, it's kind of when Pattern Keeper got to be a thing and everybody was like, it's a game changer, it's fantastic. I still like using paper patterns for my for everything, for everything I do. The only thing that I'm using a online chart for is my chatelaines, and actually I have the paper chart also, but I kind of use them both as reference. I don't like using the tablet. I have to on the chatelaines because I just cannot figure out the charts that are paper. They're too convoluted, and but that's chatelaines. As far as full coverage patterns are actually pretty easy, especially when I stitch on the diagonal and all I'm looking at is that 10 stitch row. I don't need to look at an overall thing. I just am looking at that 10 stitch row. And I like doing the paper. I like, I mark my charts with a diagonal. I put a line that I follow, and I mark off my stitches each row as I go. Now, one thing that is different, and part of this has to do again that I'm stitching in a hoop and it's closer to me. I made a big deal on the last video that I never hook my chart to my fabric, and I never highlight it on near my fabric. I do now. I actually hook I fold my charts up into a little bit, and I do this with everything that I stitch. So like if I'm stitching on like this diagonal, I'll fold it like this, and I clip this to the edge of my frame, and then I just use that little bit, and then I highlight it. And I'm very careful with my highlighter on my fabric. Let's see. Self-reported paper charts. Parking, yeah. Bottom going down. Keep the same. Don't go to my 10. I think that's basically it. That's the changes that I've made. So let me show you my charts that I'm working on. So I just showed you Kitty Magic, which again is on a 20 count easy guide. I don't think I'll use easy guide again. I like actually using a colored fabric now. I think it makes it a little bit easier to see. Especially if you use a fabric that maybe contrasts with the colors that you're using. It's easier to see to stitch, and I'm also, if I'm doing something bigger, I'm gonna not use the background. Anyway, okay, so let me show you the different projects I have. Okay, so this one is Mini Flower Kitty by Jeremiah Ketner. So I'm doing this on a 28 count, and I'm doing tent, 2/1 tent. I started this one in the top left. So this one goes like reading, you know, from left to right, and I park in the lower leg. And when I do my tent stitch, I do it so that there's the little lines on the back, not the slanty. So that's tent versus continental stitch. Continental stitch is more likely to warp your fabric, so that's why I use the tent. Plus, tent stitches uses less floss. Continental stitch, like a needlepoint, is something you might want to use if you're doing something that needs to be thicker and heavier. Like if you're doing a seat cushion or something like that, you would want to use continental or basket weave. Continental warps your fabric though more, and you need to block it, whereas tent stitch doesn't as much. So this is Mini Flower Kitty, and again, this is 28 count tent. And I I think the coverage is fine. I mean, I'm holding it up here and okay, you can see maybe some fabric, but when I hold it back here, which is how you're going to look at most things, you're not going to look at it with the magnifying glass super close. I think it looks fine. Okay, so that is Mini Flower Kitty. Let me show you my, this is a full size Heaven and Earth design. I have this in a giant hoop. I got this hoop because I wanted a really big hoop. I had no idea actually what I was getting myself into with this hoop. I think this is more like for quilting. So this is Randall Spangler's Village Bookstore. Oh goodness. Do I even have a picture of it in here? Nope. Okay, hold on. So one of the things with this one is, I think it was, when I started it, it was a little overwhelming. Like, because it was full size, I didn't quite know how to deal with it. I didn't know how to deal with all that fabric. I didn't know how to deal with all the chart. Yeah, there was just so many things about it that were overwhelming. Now this I have circles around all the little cats in here. But this is basically a Village Bookstore. And all those little circles are little hidden kitties. And so I really actually do love this pattern. And of course, looking at it here, it's going to make me probably want to pull it out and work on it. So maybe it will come off the inactive list just because I really love it so much. But see how huge this hoop is? But again, I didn't quite know how to deal with it. And I started this is my New Year, New Start in 2020. So I hadn't been stitching even a whole year when I started this. And I think maybe it was maybe more ambitious than what I was prepared for at the time. But I have more experience now. So maybe I could go back and get a lot done quickly. I mean, all I have so far is just the beginning of the sky. But yeah, I'm gonna have to think about it because, you know, honestly, I really love the chart and maybe I should revisit it. So yeah, and this is also done, this is being done on, I believe this is 25 count. I know I'm doing it in 10, but I'm not sure if it's 25 or 28 count. So, I don't know. Now that I pulled it out, maybe I'll work on that today and see how I feel about it. Okay. Then, let's see what else. So I started actually 3 full coverages this year. So this is my New Year, New Start this year. And these are from Artecy and Pinkie and Blue Boy, which when I first started stitching and I saw people stitching full coverages of Grandmaster paintings, at the time I thought, you know, if I was going to stitch a Grandmaster painting, I would want it to be Pinkie and Blue Boy. Because my mom always had a little reproductions of Pinkie and Blue Boy in our house. I have them now. They're on the side. I don't even know if you can see, but at the top of right there, you can see like the edge of a kind of ornate frame, and that's Pinkie and Blue Boy there. They are at the Huntington Museum, which is in Pasadena, here in California, and I've seen them in real life. So I always kind of liked Pinkie and Blue Boy. But when I first started stitching in 2019, I kind of casually looked for them and I couldn't find any. I couldn't find them. And then last year, when I went to look on different Artecy Unconventional Cross Stitch and the other companies that were not Heaven Earth Design, I saw that Artecy had a lot of Grandmaster paintings, and I found Pinkie and Blue Boy. So I had to get them, and I had to start them. So I've talked a lot about these in previous videos as far as the paintings themselves. They are always depicted as like a pair, although they were actually painted 100 years apart. Pinkie is by Sir Thomas Lawrence, and Blue Boy is by Thomas Gainsborough. And for whatever reason, they've always been kind of put together as a couple. This is the one project I don't have it on a dedicated frame at this time because I'm stitching both projects at the same time. So, and I didn't want to have them on something that was that big. This is on a 28 count Jazlyn. I'm stitching 2/110 on 28 count Jazlyn, which, you know, the difference between like Jazlyn, Monaco, and Lugana is the fabric, not the fabric content. So like what the combination of cotton and modal or cotton and whatever, polyester, you know, whatever the combination of fabric is what makes it Jazlyn or Lugana or Monaco. This is a Jazlyn. I don't know what the fabric content is, but it is I would say fuzzier fabric than like Lugana and Monaco. So what I think is funny is Pinkie so far only has blue in the background, and Blue Boy only has like reddy brown in the background. But yeah, so I'm stitching both of them at the same time, and then they will be separated and framed in matching frames, but they're not going to be on the same piece of fabric when they're finished. But I figured I want them to both be done at the same time, so that's why I'm stitching them at the same time. I also, because there is a bit of confetti in them, I started doing this on Catnip Faye when I got towards the end down here, and I was like ending a lot of colors. I stopped wanting to do the pin stitch because there wasn't any place to put the pin stitch where it would be covered, and I was ending so many colors that it would have been like all pin stitches. So I started doing like waist thread. So I'd pull the threads over and then I'd pull the threads over and pull them out like off of the pattern, and then it would get stitched over. And then when I had a chunk, I'd kind of cut them off at the back and then weave them back in. And that worked for the end part. And I found that with these, I started doing that a little bit because I'm close to the top. So when I'm ending a bunch of threads up here, I've just pulled them to the top here, and then I'll end up cutting them off and weaving them back in. So these are actually done. Those threads are done. So that's Pinkie and Blue Boy, which I realize don't really look like anything exciting yet. But I will get back to them. Probably they will come out again next January because I'm going to be working on full coverage in January again. But again, there's no rush. Okay, Pinkie and Blue Boy. This is the most recent one that I started, which also is from Artecy. This was a complete impulse buy. When I bought Pinkie and Blue Boy, I saw this and it was a mini. This one is only 200 by 139. So it's pretty small as far as full coverages go. And I just loved it. Mini solar system. It is very fun to stitch. It is so vibrant. I love it. And this is going to be a gift, I think, for my nephew Hudson, because he is very into the solar system and astronomy. His brother Logan is too, so I don't know, maybe they can fight over it at some point. I don't know. My brother is as well. The colors in this, just are so vibrant. I mean, there's not really like a pastel among them. It's all super vibrant, and I'm loving it. So this is what it looks like so far. Again, this one is on a 22 count Hardanger, and I am doing full cross on it. I'm doing it on a piece of Hardanger that I dyed myself. Again, it's a little bit easier to stitch on the color than it would be on white. And I figured that it will give me more options like framing or making it into a pillow because the background is pretty. So yeah, so I decided to go ahead and just use a piece of dyed fabric, and love how it's turning out. And I just hit, you know, all of this orange and red and stuff is gorgeous. You know, when you're stitching only with one color, family like that, it gets a little tiring. So when I hit the blue, I was so excited to hit that blue planet. Okay, so that is mini solar system. And trying to see really quick. I have a binder that has a lot of my other full coverage patterns in it. Man, I don't see it right off the top of my head here. Okay, so then the last full coverage that I have is another one that I started this year. And this, you know, I told myself I wasn't going to do full size, full coverage, that I was only going to stick to the quick stitches and the minis. And I told you guys that. And this, of course, is the exception to the rule because there always has to be one, right? Okay, so again, I made it a point. I dropped my pillow. Ugh. I made it a point to go on to some other shops looking for full coverage, and I was looking at Unconventional cross stitch, and I saw this chart and loved it by Amy Brown, and was like, no, it's too big. It's 650 by 459, so in no way is this a quick stitch or mini. And so I'm like, I'm not getting it. And I walked away, and I thought about this pattern for 2 weeks. And finally I was like, you know what, if I'm thinking this much about it, I just need to get it. And there's no rush, just start it, stitch on it when you want to stitch on it. And it doesn't, I did get the no background. So, you know, in my head that cuts out so much, you know. But anyway, so the chart that I'm talking about is Let Sleeping Dragons Fly by Amy Brown. I couldn't get it out of my head. I just loved it. So I went ahead and I started it. Now I do have this one on my frame that I used to use. And as I said, I put the frame on, and then I prop it on a pillow kind of on my chest, my stomach, and stitch on it that way. So this, of course, because it's big, is a huge piece of fabric. This is on 28 count Lugana, I believe. So I got a big piece of 28 count white inexpensively. And then I was like, well, the background, there's no background. So it has to be colored. So I went ahead and dyed it myself, which I kind of like. I like the fact that I dyed it. I use sunsetty colors. I use pink and orange and yellow because the pattern itself is all blues and greens and turquoise and purple. So I use colors that are not in it at all. It's all these sunsetty colors. And so dyed it myself, and that's where I am. I'm still in the very bottom corner. So this one is actually going from the, you know, the bottom right up, so it is slightly different. I am still doing a 2/1 tent, and of course, because I'm going up the diagonal, I'm parking at the top. Oop. So, you know, this one isn't gonna look like anything for a while. I think I have 2 or 3 more diagonals before I hit a little bit of the dragon. But that is one reason that I started in this corner, is because I was gonna hit the dragon, hit something interesting sooner. So, and I had to start at the bottom because since there's no background, for me starting at the top is just, that would be too confusing. I have to start where it's solid. So, yep. But I'm enjoying it, and I'm just really excited to, you know, again, I'm stitching in one color palette right now, which is the greens, and so I can't wait to like hit a turquoise or a blue or a purple in the dragon. So yeah, so that's the last one that I am currently have in production. Again, I have a couple Dimensions gold kits, which are full coverage, but I don't stitch them this way. And I have that Design Works kit, which I also stitch differently. So let me give a quick look, see if I can find those binders. I know I'm gonna like end my video and see it right away. I have so much stuff here though. Nope, I don't see them. Darn. I wanted to show you the other patterns I have. I have, as I said, I have Tuxedo Kitty, and I have a couple other full coverages that will be like next on the list to start if I get the hankering to start another one, which I don't know if that's going to happen anytime soon, but you know, you never know. So anyway, I hope that you enjoyed this little sort of revisit of the full coverage. You know, a lot of how I do it has changed, and a lot has stayed the same. I'd say the core way that I stitch full coverage has stayed the same, with some adjustments that have been made because of experience and knowledge. I think the biggest is that I'm enjoying doing tent stitch now. It goes a little bit quicker that way. And I'm working on smaller count fabrics or higher count fabrics. Full coverage is really fun. It's a different animal than stitching regularly. Some people only do full coverage, as I'm sure you know, and I enjoy both. It's two different animals. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this, and if you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the box below and I will do my best to answer. And until I see you again, please remember to be content, be kind, and be crafty. This is Carla. Bye-bye.